What is the true value of a person? Is it the title on their business card? The balance in their bank account? Or is it something deeper, something hidden from view, waiting for the right person to see it? This is a story about a woman who was invisible, and the man who saw her worth when no one else did. It's a story about the kind of wealth that can't be counted. Alara Vancy lived her life in the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic tap of her own keyboard. Her world was a small, beige cubicle in the cavernous basement of Thorn Industries, a space officially designated as Sublevel 2, Records Reconciliation. It was a corporate purgatory, a place for careers to go to be forgotten. The air smelled of stale coffee and old paper. A single, flickering bulb above her desk cast long, dancing shadows that made the stacks of financial reports look like crumbling cityscapes. Alara was, by all accounts, invisible. She wore muted colors that blended into the drab office palette, her hair pulled back in a simple, severe knot. She ate her lunch at her desk, a homemade sandwich and an apple, and she spoke so rarely that some of her colleagues probably wouldn't recognize her voice. But in this kingdom of forgotten numbers, Alara was a queen. Her gift was a strange and silent magic. She could see the music in the numbers, the story told in the endless columns of a spreadsheet. Where others saw a blur of data, she saw patterns, rhythms, and, most importantly, mistakes. She possessed a form of eidetic memory, but only for figures and financial data. She could recall a transaction from a report she'd glanced at 6 months prior with perfect clarity. It was this gift that made her exceptional at her job, and this same gift that kept her chained to it. She was too good at being a ghost in the machine. Every evening, she would return to her tiny, walk-up apartment, a space as Spartan as her cubicle. On her small kitchen table, next to a wilting plant, sat a formidable stack of envelopes. They weren't letters from friends or family. They were medical bills, a mountain of debt left behind by her mother's long, losing battle with cancer. Each notice was a paper ghost, a constant, crushing reminder of her loss and her obligation. The debt was an anchor, dragging her down, making her feel as small and insignificant as her job title suggested. She would trace the cruel, final balances with her finger. The astronomical sums a stark contrast to the tiny, fractional errors she hunted for at work. One Tuesday, deep in the fiscal quarter's dreariest hour, she found one. A discrepancy in a subsidiary's logistics budget. It was minuscule, a rounding error almost, a single misplaced decimal point buried in a sea of 7-figure line items. Anyone else, even the company's expensive automated software, would have missed it. But Alara saw it. It felt wrong, like a single sour note in an otherwise perfect symphony. She flagged it, corrected it, and sent her report up the chain, knowing full well her immediate supervisor would take the credit if it was ever noticed at all. She felt no resentment, only the quiet satisfaction of putting one small thing right in a world that felt so wrong. She didn't know that hundreds of feet above her head, in an office that felt like it was perched at the top of the world, a man was desperately searching for that one sour note. Julian Thorn, CEO of Thorn Industries, stood before a floor-to-ceiling window that framed the sprawling metropolis like a living work of art. The city glittered below, a testament to ambition and power, a world he commanded yet felt completely disconnected from. They called him the Ice King in the financial press. Cold, ruthless, brilliant. He had inherited the company from his father, a visionary who was as charismatic as he was reckless. Julian's entire career had been a reaction to his father's legacy. A painstaking, disciplined effort to build stability where there had once been chaos. He valued control, precision, and, above all, certainty. His office was a reflection of this, minimalist, severe, with clean lines and a conspicuous absence of personal effects. There were no family photos, no sentimental trinkets, only the stark beauty of steel, glass, and expensive modern art. At that moment, certainty was the one thing he didn't have. Spread across a vast black marble conference table was the proposal for the largest acquisition in his company's history, the purchase of a rival tech firm, Aerodyne. His chief financial officer, Marcus Vance, was championing the deal with an almost feverish enthusiasm. Marcus was a holdover from his father's era, a man of expensive suits and easy charm who saw the acquisition as a bold, legacy-defining move. "The synergies are undeniable, Julian," Marcus said, his voice smooth and confident. "Their market share, combined with our distribution network, is a game-changer. It's the kind of move your father would have made." The mention of his father was a carefully chosen barb, and it landed precisely as intended. A muscle tightened in Julian's jaw. He trusted data, not sentiment. And something in the data felt wrong. He couldn't articulate it. It was a faint dissonance, a hum of untruth beneath the polished surface of Aerodyne's financial reports. He'd spent sleepless nights poring over them, his gut screaming a silent warning that his logical mind could not decipher. "The numbers look too perfect," Julian said, his voice low. He gestured to the glossy report. "Profit margins are consistently high, with almost no volatility. In their sector, it's statistically improbable." Marcus chuckled, a patronizing sound. "They're just that good, Julian. We're getting a unicorn. We need to move now, before their board gets cold feet." Julian's longtime friend and corporate counsel, David Chun, stood quietly by the window. He was the opposite of Marcus, thoughtful, cautious, and completely loyal to Julian. He caught Julian's eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He felt the same unease. "The due diligence seems rushed, Marcus," David said calmly. "Maybe we should take another week. Do a deeper dive." "A week?" Marcus scoffed. "In a week, our competitors will have swooped in. This is about vision, David. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith." Julian's gaze drifted back to the city below. A leap of faith was what had nearly bankrupted this company 20 years ago. It was what had given his father a heart attack at 55. He would not make the same mistake. He needed to find the flaw in the perfect facade. He needed to hear the sour note that he knew, with every fiber of his being, was there. And he was willing to turn his entire company upside down to find it. The email landed in Every Thorn Industries inbox at 9:01 a.m. the next morning. The subject line was stark: "Mandatory manual audit. Aerodyne subsidiary accounts." The body of the message was brief and uncompromising. It was from Julian Thorne himself. He was ordering a complete, hands-on reconciliation of the raw transaction data from a specific, obscure Aerodyne subsidiary, the very one whose logistics budget Alara had just corrected. All automated systems were to be bypassed. Every invoice, every receipt, every transfer was to be cross-referenced by hand. It was a monumental, almost punitive task, designed to comb through a mountain of digital chaff to find a single hypothetical needle. A collective groan echoed through the corporate floors. It was seen as a bizarre power play, a paranoid whim of the Ice King. Executives complained about the wasted man-hours. Managers scrambled to delegate the tedious work. For most, it was a punishment. For Alara, sitting in her basement cubicle, the email felt like a calling. It was a puzzle, the biggest she had ever seen. While her colleagues grumbled and plotted ways to do the bare minimum, a quiet fire ignited within her. This was a task for which she was uniquely designed. The work was grueling. Truckloads of data, both digital and in physical paper files, were routed to the lower levels. Alara's cubicle disappeared behind walls of bankers' boxes. She worked with a focused intensity that bordered on obsession. Her colleagues left at 5, then she would truly begin. The flickering bulb became her moon, the hum of the servers her only company. Fueled by bitter, lukewarm coffee from the ancient machine down the hall, she dove into the numbers. She didn't just check them. She absorbed them. She spread the reports across the floor, crawling between them, her mind building a three-dimensional map of the company's financial lifeblood. Days blurred into nights. She saw the flow of capital like currents in an ocean. She memorized invoice numbers, shipping dates, account codes. Her small apartment saw little of her. She would go home only to shower and change, the stack of medical bills on her table seeming to mock her exhaustive, low-paid efforts. But she wasn't thinking about the money. She was hunting. She was listening for that sour note Julian Thorne was so desperate to find. Then, on the 5th night, she heard it. It wasn't a loud, obvious clang. It was a whisper, A tiny, recurring pattern she had noticed before, but had dismissed as insignificant. A series of payments to a vendor she didn't recognize? For logistical consulting, the amounts were small, just under the $10,000 threshold that would trigger an automatic review. They were consistently spaced, occurring bi-weekly. But the invoices were vague, lacking the detailed service descriptions that were standard practice. It was a ghost, a phantom expense. She cross-referenced the vendor's name. Nothing. No corporate registration, no tax ID. It didn't exist. Yet it had been paid regularly for 3 years. She followed the trail backwards, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her mind racing. The payments weren't just hiding a loss. They were offsetting a specific set of revenue streams, subtly deflating the subsidiary's actual earnings. But why? The common scam was to inflate value, not hide it. It didn't make sense. Unless the goal wasn't to fool Aerodyne's own auditors, but to create a hidden, off-the-books cash reserve. A slush fund. Her blood ran cold. This was more than a mistake. This was deliberate, sophisticated fraud. It was a secret story hidden in plain sight, a story only she could read. She knew she couldn't send this to her supervisor. He would either bury it or bungle it. This needed to go to the source. With trembling hands, she opened a new email. In the to field, she typed the name that was both a legend and a terror in the company, Julian Thorne. Her memo was a model of efficiency. 3 short paragraphs outlining the anomaly, followed by 10 pages of pure, unadulterated data. She attached scans of the phantom invoices, highlighted spreadsheets showing the payment patterns, and a concise projection of the total misappropriated funds. $17 million over 3 years. There was no florid prose, no fearful apologies for her presumption. It was just the facts, presented with the clean, cold logic of a mathematical proof. The cursor blinked over the send button. This was an act of career suicide or salvation. She was a ghost from the basement speaking directly to the king. She thought of the mountain of bills on her table, of the suffocating weight of her life. What did she have to lose? She closed her eyes and clicked. The email left her outbox with a quiet whoosh that sounded deafening in the silent office. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a wave of panic and regret washed over her. She had overstepped. She would be fired. She imagined security guards escorting her from the building, her meager belongings in a cardboard box. She buried her face in her hands, the smell of old paper and exhaustion filling her senses. High above, in the penthouse office, the email arrived with a discreet chime on Julian Thorne's computer. He was in a tense meeting with Marcus and David, the pressure to finalize the Aerodyne deal mounting. The financial press was already reporting on the potential merger, and the market was reacting. "We're out of time, Julian," Marcus pressed, his face flushed. "Their board is demanding an answer by morning. We sign or we walk away and look like fools." Julian's eyes scanned the email. The subject line was simple: Audit Anomaly Aerodyne Sub. SCCT. 7B. He clicked it open. He read Alara's 3 paragraphs. Then he opened the attachment. Silence descended on the room as he scrolled, his expression unreadable. David watched him, curious. Marcus fidgeted, annoyed at the interruption. Julian's scrolling stopped. He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't just reading the numbers. He was seeing the elegance of the analysis, the stark, irrefutable clarity of the logic. It was the sour note. Not just a note, but a whole, discordant symphony of fraud, laid bare with breathtaking precision. "Who is Alara Vancy?" Julian's voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room like a razor. Marcus squinted. "Vancy? Never heard of her. What is this?" He tried to peer at the screen. Julian angled it away. "It's from Records Reconciliation." Sublevel 2-inch Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Sublevel 2? Julian, you can't be serious. It's probably some data entry drone who doesn't know how to read a balance sheet. Delete it. We have a multi-billion-dollar deal to close." But Julian wasn't listening. He was reading the memo again, seeing the intelligence that shone through the sterile data. This wasn't a drone. This was the analyst he'd been searching for his entire career. He looked up, his gaze hard as diamond. He ignored Marcus completely and looked past him, toward the door, as if addressing the entire building. "Find her," he commanded, his voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. "Bring her to me." Now the order ricocheted down the chain of command. A confused executive assistant called a vice president, who called a director, who called a manager. The name Elara Vancy was spoken with increasing bewilderment as the request descended from the pristine heights of the executive suite to the forgotten depths of the basement. 20 minutes later, Elara's supervisor, a paunchy man named Gerald, appeared at her cubicle, his face pale and sweating. "Vancy? You're wanted." "Upstairs," he said the word upstairs, as if it were a foreign country. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She was being fired. She stood up, smoothing down her simple gray skirt, and followed Gerald to the elevator, a silent procession to her own execution. The elevator ride was an ascent through worlds. It climbed past the bustling floors of marketing and sales, past the hushed, carpeted hallways of legal and finance, and finally, with a gentle chime, opened onto the executive floor. The air here was different. It was thin, cool, and smelled faintly of leather and money. The silence was absolute. A severe-looking woman with a headset met them, her eyes flicking over Elara's worn cardigan and sensible shoes with faint disdain. "Ms. Vancy? Mr. Thorne will see you now." Gerald scurried away, relieved to have delivered his charge. Elara was led down a long, white corridor and through a set of towering oak doors into Julian Thorne's office. The sheer scale of the room stole her breath. It wasn't an office. It was a landscape. The panoramic window showcasing the city felt like a living entity. And there, standing in the center of it all, was Julian Thorne. He was exactly as the papers described him, tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, with an aura of intense, controlled energy. Marcus Vance stood near the desk, his arms crossed, a sneer fixed on his face. David Chun offered her a small, cautious smile. Elara felt a powerful urge to turn and run. She clutched the strap of her worn shoulder bag, her knuckles white. She was a ghost, suddenly dragged into the blinding light. "Ms. Vancy," Julian began, his voice even and devoid of emotion. He held up a tablet displaying her memo. "This is your work?" She found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." "Explain it to me," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Marcus scoffed audibly. "Julian, this is a waste of time. We have lawyers waiting." Julian silenced him with a single glacial look. He never took his eyes off Elara. "Explain it," he repeated softly. Something shifted inside Elara. The fear receded, replaced by the familiar comfort of her own expertise. This was her world. These were her numbers. She took a breath and began to speak. She didn't talk about fraud or theft. She told the story of the numbers. She described the flow of funds like a river, and how she'd found a hidden, artificial tributary diverting the water. She spoke of the vendor codes as names, the invoices as conversations. Her voice grew stronger, more confident with every word. She wasn't a frightened clerk anymore. She was an analyst, a translator of a secret language. She walked him through her logic, step by step, her explanation so clear, so simple, that even Marcus's sneer began to falter. Julian listened, completely still, his focus absolute. He wasn't just hearing the explanation. He was watching her. He saw the passion in her eyes, the fierce intelligence that had been hidden away in his company's basement. He saw the truth not just in the data but in her. When she finished, the room was silent. David Chun looked at her with newfound respect. Marcus looked apoplectic. Julian finally moved, setting the tablet down on his desk. "The Aerodyne deal is on hold," he stated flatly. "Indefinitely." "What?" Marcus exploded. "Julian, you can't. Our reputation." "My reputation is built on making sound decisions, Marcus, not reckless ones." Julian cut in, his voice like ice. He turned his attention back to Elara. The coldness in his eyes had been replaced by something else. a flicker of intense curiosity. "You have a gift, Ms. Vancy," he paused, his gaze sweeping over her, from her worn shoes to her intelligent, questioning eyes. "And I believe my company has been wasting it." He walked around his desk and stood before her. The disparity in their stations was a chasm between them. His $1,000 suit, her $10 cardigan. "I have an offer for you. A temporary consulting contract, effective immediately. You will work directly for me. Your task will be to lead a new, internal due diligence team to investigate not just this anomaly, but every aspect of Aerodyne's financials. You will have full access, full authority. You will report only to me." Elara stared at him, speechless. This was impossible. A dream. I'm a reconciliation clerk," she stammered. "You are the only person in this 10,000-employee company who found this," he countered. "That makes you the most qualified person for the job." He named a salary. It was a figure so large, so astronomical to her, that her mind couldn't even process it. It was more than she made in a decade. It was enough to wipe out her mother's debt. All of it, with a single paycheck. Tears pricked her eyes. "I accept," she whispered. From the side, Marcus Vance watched, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He had just been sidelined for a ghost from the basement. This was not just an insult. It was a declaration of war. The transformation was jarring. Elara was moved from her basement cubicle to a glass-walled office on the executive floor, just down the hall from Julian's. A corporate credit card was pressed into her hand with instructions to acquire a professional wardrobe. She walked through high-end department stores in a daze, the soft fabrics and exorbitant price tags feeling alien against her skin. She traded her worn cardigans for tailored blazers, her sensible flats for low, elegant heels. But even in the new clothes, she felt like an imposter, a child playing dress-up in her mother's closet. The corporate world of the top floor was a treacherous landscape. The currency here wasn't accuracy or diligence. It was power, influence, and unwritten rules she couldn't decipher. Whispers followed her down the hallway. Colleagues who had never known she existed now stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She was Thorne's pet project, the Cinderella from the basement. The animosity was a palpable force, and its epicenter was Marcus Vance. He saw her not just as a rival, but as a personal affront to his authority and status. He became her shadow, a constant source of subtle sabotage. During her first presentation to the executive committee, the projector mysteriously malfunctioned just as she began to speak. Files she requested from his department would arrive incomplete or days late. In meetings, he would interrupt her with condescending questions, designed to trip her up and expose her lack of experience in corporate maneuvering. "Ms. Vancy," he would begin, a smug smile on his face. "Perhaps you could explain the implications of this data on our Q4 derivative strategy? It's a bit more complex than simple bookkeeping." Elara would falter, her expertise in raw data no match for his mastery of boardroom jargon. She felt her confidence, so solid when she was alone with the numbers, begin to erode under the constant pressure. Julian was her only shield. He would step in, his voice cutting through Marcus's games. "Marcus, that's not relevant. Let Ms. Vancy continue." He would meet with her privately after the brutal meetings, his expression unreadable. "Ignore him," he told her one evening, as they stood in her new office looking out at the darkening city. "His insecurity is his weakness. Your focus is your strength. Stay on the data." But Marcus was growing bolder. His campaign of petty sabotage escalated. One morning, a damaging story appeared in a major financial newspaper, detailing Thorne Industries' internal turmoil over the stalled Aerodyne deal. The article contained sensitive, confidential details from Elara's preliminary reports, framing them in a way that made the company and Julian look indecisive and weak. It hinted that a junior, unqualified analyst was derailing a landmark deal. The leak was a devastating blow. The board was in an uproar. An emergency meeting was called, and the pressure on Julian was immense. Marcus, feigning outrage, immediately pointed the finger. "The leak obviously came from her," he declared to Julian, his voice ringing with false sincerity. She's in over her head. She's a liability. You must remove her, Julian, before she does any more damage. The accusation hung in the air. Alara, summoned to Julian's office, felt the walls closing in. She had been so careful. She hadn't spoken to anyone. To be accused of such a betrayal, after he had given her this incredible chance, was crushing. She looked at Julian, expecting to see the cold disappointment, the end of her impossible dream. His face was grim, his jaw set. The board was calling for her head. His legacy, his control over the company was on the line. He was being forced to choose between his own reputation and the ghost he had plucked from the basement. Julian looked from Alara's pale, stricken face to the furious, opportunistic gleam in Marcus's eyes. He had spent his life managing risk, assessing threats, and reading people. He knew the desperate hunger for power in Marcus, and he saw the unwavering, terrified integrity in Alara. There was no question in his mind who was telling the truth. "No," Julian said, his voice quiet but absolute. The word dropped into the tense silence of the office like a stone. "Ms. Vancy is not going anywhere," he turned to Alara, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the Ice King facade. She saw a flash of fierce, protective loyalty. "She is under my direct protection. The source of this leak is internal, and we will find it. Until then, she will continue her work." Marcus was stunned into silence, his plan having backfired spectacularly. He had expected Julian to cut his losses, to sacrifice the pawn to save the king. But Julian had just doubled down, tying his own fate directly to Alara's. After Marcus left, his fury barely contained. A heavy silence filled the office. David Chun, who had been present for the confrontation, finally spoke. "That was a bold move, Julian. You've just declared war on Marcus in front of the entire company." "It was a necessary one," Julian replied, his gaze still on Alara. He turned to her. "He will come after you harder now. We need to be smarter." It was in that moment that David's role shifted. The wary ally, the cautious lawyer, saw the truth of the situation. He saw Julian's uncharacteristic faith and Alara's quiet fortitude. He made a decision. "She's not alone," David said, looking at Alara with a new warmth. "I'll help you. Navigating the corporate sharks is my specialty." An unlikely alliance was forged in that glass tower. The billionaire, the basement analyst, and the lawyer. David became Alara's guide, teaching her how to document every request, how to communicate through official channels to create a paper trail, how to anticipate Marcus's political attacks. With David handling the political interference, Alara was free to immerse herself once more in the data. She and Julian began working side by side, often late into the night. The professional barrier between them started to dissolve. In the quiet hours, surrounded by financial projections, they began to talk. He learned about the mountain of medical debt, about the mother she had adored and the years she had spent as a caregiver. He saw that her meticulous nature wasn't a personality quirk. It was a survival mechanism born from a life where one small mistake could have devastating consequences. She, in turn, began to see the man behind the myth. She learned about his brilliant, reckless father and the constant, suffocating pressure of his legacy. She saw that his coldness wasn't a lack of feeling, but a shield against the chaos he feared. He was lonely, isolated by a fortune he never asked for and a responsibility he felt crushing him. One night, as they were tracing the fraudulent payments, Alara had a breakthrough. "This isn't just a slush fund," she said, pointing to a complex web of transactions she had mapped out on a whiteboard. "That's what they want us to think. Look," she showed him how the stolen money was being funneled through a series of offshore shell corporations, cleaned, and then secretly reinvested back into Aerodyne in the form of untraceable private equity. "They're not stealing from Aerodyne," she said, her voice filled with awe at the audacity of the scheme. "They're secretly buying its stock, driving up the price. The fraud isn't to hide a loss. It's to artificially inflate the company's valuation before the sale." Julian's blood ran cold. "So when we acquire them at the inflated price, the people behind this scheme who bought in at the real, lower value will make a fortune," she finished. It was a brilliant, deeply illegal pump-and-dump scheme, with Thorn Industries as the intended victim. The payout would be in the hundreds of millions. Someone on our side has to be involved, Julian said, his mind racing. Someone who knew the acquisition was coming. Someone who was pushing it hard. They both looked at each other. The name hung unspoken in the air between them. Marcus Vance. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was his endgame, and he was about to risk everything to see it through. The day of the final board meeting arrived, cloaked in a tense, gray morning sky. The atmosphere on the executive floor was electric with anticipation. This was the day Julian Thorne's leadership would face its ultimate test. The board was divided, the press was circling, and Marcus Vance had orchestrated the moment perfectly. He planned not only to force the Aerodyne acquisition through, but also to publicly humiliate Alara and consolidate his own power in the ensuing chaos. Alara walked into the boardroom beside Julian, David Chun following closely behind. The long, polished table was surrounded by the stony-faced members of the board, a gallery of old money and corporate power. Marcus was already there, standing at the head of the table, exuding a predatory confidence. He gave Alara a look of pure triumph, a silent promise of her impending destruction. The meeting began. Marcus took the floor, launching into a masterful presentation. He painted a picture of a golden opportunity being squandered by paranoia and the misguided advice of an inexperienced junior consultant. He presented a new report, prepared by an independent firm he had hired, which systematically refuted Alara's findings. The report was a masterpiece of deception, filled with complex financial jargon and doctored data, all designed to suggest that the anomalies Alara found were nothing more than standard accounting practices, misinterpreted by a novice. The truth, Marcus concluded, his voice resonating with false gravity, is that Ms. Vance's analysis is flawed, dangerously so. She has jeopardized this company and exposed us to ridicule. He then delivered his killing blow, turning to the board. I am therefore making two motions. First, that we terminate Ms. Vance's contract, effective immediately. And second, that we vote to approve the Aerodyne acquisition, as originally proposed. Before this opportunity is lost forever, a murmur went through the room. The board members looked at Julian, their expressions a mixture of doubt and impatience. Julian's empire was teetering on a knife's edge. His father's ghost seemed to loom in the corner, whispering of failure. He looked at Alara. She was pale, but her eyes were clear and steady. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Before we vote, Julian said, his voice calm and steady, commanding the room's attention. Ms. Vance has a final presentation. Marcus laughed. We've heard enough from the accounting department. Let's vote. She will be heard, Julian stated, his tone leaving no room for debate. Alara stood up. She didn't go to the podium. She simply stood at her place, a small figure against the backdrop of immense power. She held no glossy report, no complex slides. With David's help, she had prepared a different kind of proof. On the large screen behind her, a simple diagram appeared. It was the web of shell corporations she had uncovered. Mr. Vance is correct about one thing, she began, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. I am not a corporate strategist. I am an accountant. I follow the money. And this is where the money led me. She then began her story. With devastating precision, she unraveled the entire scheme. She didn't use jargon. She used simple, direct language. She showed them the ghost vendor, the offshore accounts, the reinvestment scheme. Then David Chun stepped forward. In the process of our investigation, we issued a subpoena for the incorporation documents of the primary shell company, a firm called Orion Capital Partners. An image of a legal document filled the screen. It lists a single director. Alara advanced the slide. A name appeared, circled in red. It wasn't Marcus Vance. It was his wife. A collective gasp went through the room. But Alara wasn't finished. We also traced the digital signature on the initial fraudulent transactions within Aerodyne servers. Another image appeared, a string of code. And we traced the IP address of the user who leaked my confidential report to the press. a new line of text appeared. The two strings of code were identical, and the IP address was traced back to the home office of Marcus Vance. The trap had been sprung. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the sound of Marcus Vance's ragged breathing. His confident facade had crumbled, replaced by a mask of sheer panic. He was exposed, utterly and completely. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Marcus Vance was fired before he even left the boardroom. Security escorted him from the building, a man who had flown too close to the sun. His legacy reduced to a single damning presentation. He would later face a barrage of federal charges for insider trading and wire fraud. The Aerodyne acquisition was officially and permanently canceled, the announcement saving Thorne Industries from a catastrophic financial blow and sending Julian's reputation as a shrewd, principled leader soaring. Alara, the ghost from the basement, was suddenly the most famous person in the company. The whispers that followed her now were not of suspicion, but of awe. She was the woman who had saved the king. In the days that followed, Julian called her into his office. The vast room, once so intimidating, now felt familiar. "The board has approved the creation of a new position," he said, his voice holding a warmth she had never heard before. "Director of Strategic Analysis and Corporate Integrity. It comes with a permanent seat on the executive committee." He paused, a rare, small smile touching his lips. "They requested you specifically. I told them I'd have to see if you were interested." Alara looked at him, the life-altering offer hanging in the air. A few weeks ago, she was drowning in debt, invisible and unheard. Now she was being offered a seat at the most powerful table in the company. "But the offer is more than a job, Alara," he continued, taking a step closer. He used her first name, and the sound of it in this formal space was intimate, personal. "What you didn't just save the company. You reminded me of what it's supposed to be about. Not just profit and loss, but value. Integrity." He looked out the window at the city, then back at her. "You saved me from becoming a person I never wanted to be. A lonely king in an empty castle." The professional line between them vanished completely, replaced by an undeniable, powerful connection that had been forged in late-night work sessions and shared vulnerability. It was a connection that went far beyond balance sheets and stock prices. That evening, they weren't in the boardroom. They were standing on the private balcony of his penthouse apartment. The city lights spread out before them like a carpet of fallen stars. The cool night air felt clean, fresh. Alara was no longer wearing a borrowed blazer. She was wearing a simple, elegant dress. She looked out at the glittering expanse, no longer an outsider peering in, but a part of the vibrant, living city. She had paid off her mother's debt with her first paycheck. The paper ghosts were gone. The anchor was lifted. She was free. Julian stood beside her, not as a CEO, but as a man who had finally found something more valuable than his company. "I used to look out at all this," he said quietly, gesturing to the city, "and all I saw were assets and liabilities, buildings, companies, markets." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "Now I see something different. I see potential. I see stories. You taught me how to see that." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, certain. "Your gift isn't just with numbers, Alara. It's seeing the truth that lies beneath the surface." And in that moment, under the vast, open sky, the underdog with the hidden gift and the powerful, perceptive outsider found their own priceless treasure. Not in a stock portfolio or a corporate title, but in each other. So, let me ask you again. What is the true value of a person? Perhaps it has nothing to do with where you start, and everything to do with the integrity you carry, the hidden gifts you nurture, and the courage to let your true worth shine. Look around you. Who in your life might have a hidden gift, a quiet brilliance waiting to be seen? Let us know their story in the comments below. Your story might be the one that inspires someone else to finally see the value that's been there all along.